Hey there, I'm Sanjay Gupta in for Anderson Cooper. Welcome to the 360 podcast. A super failure by the super committee charged with cutting the deficit. We're keeping them honest. Let's get started. We begin tonight keeping them honest, as we always do, on Capitol Hill and the super failure by the bipartisan super committee tasked with cutting the U.S. deficit. Big news tonight. Forget about all those promises of solving the budget mess, and forget about all that talk about failure not being an option. The 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans on the committee have announced this: they can't reach a deal to cut at least $1.2 trillion from the budget. For legislative reasons, they had to announce a deal by today. But there's no deal after negotiating for 2.5 months, and they don't have the guts to even explain why on camera and take questions from reporters. Instead, this afternoon, after the markets closed, Democratic Senator Patty Murray and Republican Congressman Jeb Hensarling, who are the co-chairs of the committee, released this statement. It reads in part, quote, "After months of hard work and intense deliberations, we have come to the conclusion today that it will not be possible to make any bipartisan agreement available to the public before the committee's deadline. Despite our inability to bridge the committee's significant differences, we end this process united in our belief that the nation's fiscal crisis must be addressed and that we cannot leave it for the next generation to solve. We remain hopeful that Congress can build on this committee's work and can find a way to tackle this issue in a way that works for the American people and our economy." Now, keeping them honest, they remain hopeful that Congress can build on their work, and they say they are united in the belief the fiscal crisis must be addressed, yet they didn't do the job they were asked to do. The statement goes on to say this, quote, "We want to express our appreciation to every member of this committee, each of whom came into the process committed to achieving a solution that has eluded many groups before us." You know, here we go again, politicians thanking one another. And thanking each other for what? I mean, they didn't get the job done. And as far as being committed to achieving a solution, well, it's deadline day and there is no solution. The fallback plan, in case you're curious, is a set of automatic cuts from the defense budget and elsewhere, which would start in January of 2013. And pressure is already building on Capitol Hill to stop that plan. In fact, earlier this evening, President Obama said, "No way."
Already, some in Congress are trying to undo these automatic spending cuts. My message to them is simple. No. I will veto any effort to get rid of those automatic spending cuts to domestic and defense spending. There will be no easy off-ramps on this one. We need to keep the pressure up to compromise, not turn off the pressure.
You know, tough talk from President Obama in the last couple of hours, but a lot of people are saying, look, we haven't heard much from him over the past few weeks on the super committee. Instead, for months, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have been vowing that failure is not an option. Listen to this.
Let me say this about the Joint Committee. Failure is not an option.
We must live and breathe believing that failure is not an option.
Failure is not an option. Failure is absolutely not an option.
Failure can't be an option. Failure is not an option.
Failure is not an option.
Failure is not an option.
Failure should not be an option.
My view is that failure is not an option.
Failure is not an option.
Failure cannot be accepted.
The American people need an outcome. They expect an outcome. They deserve an outcome. And I expect to get one.
The American people expect an outcome, and they deserve an outcome, as you just heard there. But keeping them honest, here we are tonight. No deal. Complete and utter failure. And the markets, by the way, they noticed as well. The Dow took a beating today when news spread about the panel's apparent failure and debt concerns abroad. At the closing bell, blue chips had already fallen 250 points. And back to that statement from the committee co-chairs, all that talk of months of hard work, you know, you think they would have spent the weekend in marathon negotiating sessions trying to reach some sort of agreement. But instead, many of the super committee members were on the Sunday talk show circuit yesterday, blaming the other side for the failed talks. In fact, we know of no face-to-face meetings for the group itself over the weekend. A senior GOP aide told CNN there was a conference call. Yes, a conference call. It begs the question, though, why didn't they attempt face-to-face negotiations when they claimed that failure was not an option? Did congressional leaders push hard enough for a deal? A lot of people asking that question tonight. And here to talk about the raw politics, CNN political contributors Ari Fleischer, former press secretary for President George W. Bush, and Democratic strategist Paul Begala, and also with us, senior political analyst David Gergen. You guys have all had very busy days. David Gergen, let me start off with you. You wrote this .com op-ed that asked a question, the headline, have they gone nuts in Washington? I mean, what do you think? First, I mean, were you surprised at all by this? I mean, what do you think is going on?
Very surprised. The history that I think all three of us have seen in the past is that we've often had contentious politics, deep philosophical differences between parties. But at the 11th hour, typically, people on both sides have put down some of their differences, found a way to get somewhere close to the middle, and signed a deal that at least got you partway there. This is one of the first times I can remember when it's been utter failure and occurring, Sanjay, in the midst of an economic situation that's very fragile. As you mentioned, we have real problems in Europe right now. The euro could collapse over there. They're definitely heading towards some sort of recession that could rebound here. And that kind of volatility in the marketplace, dampening consumer confidence, you could have a lot of things start to unwind here, and people get hurt with loss of jobs. So this is, in my way of thinking, a reckless, irresponsible gamble on the part of Congress.
I mean, part of the reason, David, I'm going to ask Paul this as well, is that, a lot of people, it's been 2.5 months, a lot of people thought that there's just no way that they're going to come to some sort of agreement out here. In fact, Paul, some people are saying that President Obama wanted, the only thing he wanted more than a deal was no deal, so that he could spend 2012 running against Republicans in Congress. Is that a fair characterization?
I just don't think so. No, Sanjay, there's been a good deal of reporting that the president was pushing for a big deal. We know back when this super committee was created, the president was pushing very, very hard, not for the $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction that they couldn't meet today, but for $4 or $5 trillion. So, no, I have to say, the thing I'm frustrated about in this and some of the coverage is that the natural thing is to say, well, a pox on both their houses. Democrats don't want to cut spending, Republicans don't want to raise taxes. That's not the truth. Democrats had agreed to hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts in spending programs that they love. That's a hard thing for a Democrat to do. Republicans refused to raise a nickel in taxes, even from the wealthiest people, which is very popular, actually, with the American people. It wasn't even a hard thing to do. Republicans wouldn't do something easy. Democrats were willing to do something tough. The story here is this fetish that Republicans have developed about tax cuts in the last few years, and it is a fetish. It's a perversion. President Reagan, for whom David Gergen served, he didn't want to, but he raised taxes significantly many times as president because he had to try to pay down some deficits. And that's what Republicans have to adjust to today and lose this fetish that they have about taxes.
David Gergen served a lot of presidents, as you know, to be fair. And Paul, let's be fair here. There's a lot of people very entrenched on both sides. Compromise was not an adjective that immediately springs to mind, no matter how you characterize it. Some are saying Republicans didn't want to make a deal now either. They wanted to punt until January of 2013, when they were hoping to control Congress and the White House, so they wouldn't have to make any kind of deal with Democrats at all. What do you think about that?
Sanjay, I've been a part of two of the last major budget agreements that were reached between Congress and the White House, and there have been three in recent times. One was George H.W. Bush did it with a Democratic Congress in 1990. President Bill Clinton did it with a Republican Congress in 1997, and George W. Bush had a budget agreement with a 50-50 Senate in 2001. In all three of those instances, you had a coming together of Congress with the president and the president in the room, the president's people in the room. What separated this failure, which is a very disappointing failure, from the previous successes was the absolute lack of presidential involvement. And that's where I am troubled process-wise. Where is President Obama? Why didn't he help and put his shoulder to the wheel, as his predecessors, Democrat and Republican, with different makeups of the Congress, Democrat and Republican, did? There's a pathway to success, and it always involves the president and the legislature. It's always messy. But when you take the president out of the equation, Congress is almost always out to lunch, but what you have here is a president who just seems in over his head and is not trying to help because he's really focused just on protecting his brand and not forging the hard compromises, the hard agreements that we know are necessary to get an agreement like this done.
All right, some have said that Republicans on the committee were reluctant to have President Obama involved at all with the super committee, right? So it may have been some of that as opposed to, as you're saying, lack of leadership.
No, I really don't think that's the case. I think they did as Congress always does. Congress overextends what it thinks it can do on its own, and almost always they need to get helped out by the executive. That is how our system is built. That's why there were three precedents, three modern-era successes dealing with divided government. I just think we're in an era where, so long as Barack Obama is president, divided government will not work. It has worked in the past, and I just don't think it will. I think you either have to go back to re-elect President Obama and give him the majorities that the Democrats had in 2009 and 2010, and you'll get more of what happened in 2009 and 2010, which is this buildup of debt, or elect a Republican to the White House and elect an all-Republican majority in the Congress, and then I think things will get done.
Thanks for watching the 360 podcast. Don't miss 360 weeknights, 8 and 10 Eastern on CNN. See you then.
CNN, weeknights at 8 and 10. I live here, but I work here, and here, and here.
We have complete coverage tonight for the full hour here from Joplin, Missouri.
We're here right along the U.S.-Mexico border. Sometimes it makes for a long commute, but the stories don't come to us.
And we're coming to you from the port in Sendai, where there's just destruction all around.
What else would you expect from the worldwide leader in news?
Anderson Cooper 360. CNN, weeknights at 8 and 10 Eastern.